Thanks very much for that, Andrew. That's very moving. And at the risk of this becoming a kind of compliment fest, as I say in the book, actually, I mean, working with the people who organised the Stop the War Coalition over the last 10 years has been, 12 years actually, has been an honour and a privilege, and it's almost everything I've learned, almost everything I know I've learned from that experience. And Andrew, along with Lindsay, were actually the chief architects of the Stop the War Coalition, and clearly they played a historic role in the development of the movement in Britain. And also thank you for the words about the war and the impact of the war, because obviously there's a huge amount to discuss on the 10th anniversary, and this is just one of many discussions that have been taking place. And obviously I'm just going to touch on a few elements of the experience and the history, and a polemic book really, because there is all sorts of kind of different interpretations, both of the war, the meaning of the war, the record of the movement, and so on. I have to admit that one of the purposes and motivations of the writing the book was Blair. And really, you know, as Andrew says, the media discussion in the last week or so, 10 years on, has been almost as aggravating as the media discussion was in the build-up to the war. And it's quite extraordinary when you think about it, that this man who is so vilified and so hated, and rightly so, by so many millions of people in Britain and across the world, is wheeled out on the 10th anniversary as the main commentator on events. You know, I mean, it passes, it's beyond belief really. And I mean, even the best sort of elements of the coverage have been, the sort of narrative has been, oh, terrible things happened, lots of people were killed, maybe illegal things happened, but it wasn't actually anyone's fault. No individual was actually to blame for it, or no set of individuals. Which, if you think about it, is a kind of extraordinary thing, because actually, of all the barbarities that are perpetrated by the system under which we live, by the capitalist system, war is the most kind of conscious, planned, deliberate element of it, really. I mean, you know, you order people to go in and bomb certain targets, you know, and events unfold because of that specific conscious decision. So the idea that, you know, bad things happen but no one's to blame is particularly nonsensical, I think, when it comes to the issue of war. The other kind of story or approach that is being touted is even madder, really, which is that maybe bad things were done, but you can't really blame Tony Blair because he believed that what he was doing was right. Now, you know, would this stand up in a court of law, really? Hopefully one day we'll get to that point to find out. But the argument, yeah, okay, I murdered lots of innocent people, but I did it because it was the right thing to do, my lord. You know, it's not much of an argument, really, but this is the kind of thing that we're being subjected to. So I just did want to say, in a way, just to get it off my chest, that the true facts are that Tony Blair made a secret agreement as early as March 2002, months after 9/11, and nearly a year, well actually a year before the war actually happened. He made a secret agreement with George Bush, not just that Britain would be committed to a war, but also that it would be a war for regime change. I mean, and there's no ambiguity about this. There's written evidence in the public domain that says that. So in a certain sense, and by the way, you know, war for regime change is illegal under international. So, you know, it isn't that much of a debate to do the kind of moral and general political sense. Tony Blair is a war criminal, but in pure legal, no question that that is the truth. And I think really that's what people like Desmond Tutu and now Hans Blix actually mean when they go, as they have been doing, they go public and they say Tony Blair actually is a war criminal. They mean literally, legally, and in strict and formal terms that is the case. And I think that's very important. And one of the elements of the campaign that we're involved in is to try and press that demand forward and to make sure that at some stage, however far it may be in the future, Tony Blair does actually get dragged in front of some sort of war crimes tribunal, some sort of proper judicial process to make sure that he answers for the crimes that he committed. So I've got that off my chest. To go on to the kind of main substantive point, the things that I think on consideration are perhaps the most important, because maybe they're the most about the history, about the book. There's three things I want to talk about really. The first is about just a little bit about the kind of the nature of the movement and the history of the anti-war movement, because there is a caricature which is widely considered, or official politics does actually pay any kind of attention to the movement. There is a caricature which says that basically what happened back in is that lots of people, maybe this demonstration, then there was a war and they got depressed and that was it, basically. That's the kind of caricature view, which unfortunately is surprisingly prevalent even on the left and in the movement, to be honest. And therefore I think it's worth nailing this, because this really isn't what actually happened. In fact, what happened was over Iraq a cycle of massive demonstrations. The first really big demonstration was in September 2002. About 400,000 people marched. The biggest anti-war demonstration in British history. That one was. Then, of course, there was the February the 15th 2 million demonstration, which was a global protest in which there were demonstrations in 800 cities around the world. I mean, there's no way of calculating the numbers, obviously, but researchers say between 10 and 30 million marched around the world. By far the biggest protest event in world history. But that wasn't it. After that, there was we broke a whole set of records actually in Britain. We had the biggest demonstration in British history. We then went on weeks later to have the biggest demonstration in wartime in British history. And then months later, when George Bush visited London in November 2003, the biggest weekday demonstration in British history, which was 250, maybe even 300,000 people marched, on a Thursday afternoon. I mean, can you imagine that? Not a strike, not based on industrial action. This was a movement demonstration, and we all assembled at the end in Trafalgar Square and pulled down this massive statue of George Bush, and it was another historic day. And then after that, that wasn't it. After that, there was a whole series of other demonstrations as the war and the kind of events coming out of the Iraq War developed. There was huge demonstrations over the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 2006, and then after that there was monster demonstrations against the attack on Gaza in 2009. So this was a kind of cycle of demonstrations over Iraq that then created a movement that actually, I believe, continues to this day. We haven't had the last few years demonstrations on that scale, but I think if there was, and unfortunately I think there may well be, serious plans to attack Iran, I believe that we'll be able to get back to those kind of figures in the streets once again. The other thing about the protest movement was that it wasn't just marching. That actually there was, particularly off the back of February the 15th, 2000, the big demonstration, there was a massive outbreak of direct action, which is something, again, which is absolutely not mentioned anywhere. There was, in fact, I'm going to read a couple of quotes here. Sorry, some quotes. Here's one from Lindsay German, no less, the convener of the Stop the War Coalition, which was, she said, she was quoted in The Guardian, big article in The Guardian. Again, this gives you a sort of flavour of the times, really. On the Monday after the February the 15th, Monday, February the 17th of 2003, and the headline of the article was "New Protests Planned to Bring Britain to a Standstill." Stop the War convener Lindsay German was quoted calling on people to walk out of their offices, strike, sit down, occupy buildings, demonstrate and do whatever they think fit the moment the war starts. She went on to say, "We want to completely close down Whitehall and prevent the Ministry of Defence going to work." So, those people that say that we didn't organise direct action. And coming out of that, there was a historic wave of school student strikes. The biggest school student strikes in British history, again. Literally thousands of schools at one point or another in the weeks running up to the war went out and demonstrated and protested. And on the day the war started, I mean, it really was an incredible event. Thousands and thousands of school students marched into central London. Lots of them had never been into central London before, and literally closed down the centre of the city. And this happened right across the country. And actually it wasn't just school students, because one of the most moving interviews that I did for the book was with a guy who unfortunately can't be here, called Trevor Phillips, who was a trade unionist for the Lecturers Union. He was given responsibility by that excellent union to try and organise as much mayhem really against the war as possible. And when I interviewed him, he said he was literally in tears, because he said that he'd been talking to people about taking strike action if the war should start and so on, and trying to encourage people. And he said that on the day the war started, obviously a very emotional day for everyone, he was sitting in front of his computer and taking phone calls, just watching all these reports come in of lecturers from around the country who were saying, we've come out, we've closed down our college, I'm going with the students down to the centre of my town to close down the centre of the city, I'm marching, the lecturers at such and such a college are marching with trade unionists from the civil service and from the councils, we're closing down the Mersey Tunnel. All this kind of, you know, massive level of direct action that was being organised. And he just said, he said it was the most moving day of his life. He said, you know, on one hand there was this crime being perpetrated. On the other hand, the people of Britain, the trade unions and stuff, had responded in such an incredible way that he felt totally humbled by it. And you know, that was testimony to the fact that that all this happened. And I say this not just for the historical record, although I think it's very important that we don't forget that incredible, you know, that record of civil disobedience that did take place. But I say it as well because I think this is an example of something that is a characteristic of mass protest nowadays, which is that, you know, we're not necessarily getting the strikes that we'd like to have a lot of the time, but that actually what tends to give people the confidence to take strike action is precisely the kind of mass movements, the marches, the protests and so forth, that give people the sense of not being alone, the sense that they're kind of empowered by the wider movement. And I think in a way that's a lesson as we face not just further wars but a whole other sets of struggles in the years ahead. So just a couple of other things. The second thing is, which is I suppose the most important argument of all in a way, or the one that you come up against most, is a knee-jerk reaction of, oh well, we marched and the war happened anyway and that was that. And obviously there is, unfortunately, the element of truth. We didn't stop the war. We didn't stop the war in Iraq. But what I do in my book is to try and, you know, is to show the other side of the picture, really. And the first thing is that actually, and we didn't really know it at the time because they kept it a secret, but actually in the last few years the truth has come out that the movement in all its different forms caused absolute panic in Downing Street and consternation in Whitehall and in the government. And you know, they really weren't sure that they could get away with it. And all the accounts, all the insider accounts and the memoirs and stuff, even Tony Blair's, to be honest, admit to the fact that there was absolute dismay and really chaos at the siege of government. And John Camphor's book, Blair's Wars, he said government ground to a halt for about 3 weeks. There was no government taking place because they were obsessed with this problem. There was an account by an FT journalist who went up, because Blair went up to Scotland on the day. He went up to the Labour Party conference in Scotland, and this FT journalist said he was with them in the Blair camp, and he said that they went up to this Labour Party conference in Scotland. They didn't know what was going to happen. They were worried that the conference was going to be a complete fiasco, that literally they wouldn't be allowed in, or that, you know, the whole thing was falling apart. In their minds, the situation was on a knife edge. And I never thought I'd do this, but I'll just give a little quote from Alistair Campbell, actually. He says that this is him writing in his diary on the morning of the demo, on the morning of February the 15th. He said that he met Tony Blair to go up to Scotland, neither of them had slept. And they said, and he says, every part of the strategy was in tatters. Ray the EU, Ray the UN, Ray the US, Ray the party, Ray the country which was about to march against us. Now, you know, Jack Straw turned round the next day or the day after to Tony Blair and said, look, if you carry on with this, the only regime change that's going to take place is going to take place in this office. And this was the level of kind of... So they didn't believe, they weren't sure they would get through it. They were so rocked by it. And the clearest proof of this is an extraordinary sequence of events that took place a couple of weeks later. When Jeff Hoon, who was the Minister of Defence, phoned Donald Rumsfeld, his opposite number in the US, on March the 11th, 9 days before the war, and said to Donald Rumsfeld, we have real problems, more than you imagine. We may not be able to participate in this war. And, you know, so again, that gives you an idea.